100 years of training. 50,000 elite warriors. The most advanced invasion fleet in galactic history. They spent a century preparing to conquer Earth. It lasted 12 minutes. The Galactic Kralaxian hegemony was not built on bravery. It was built on forms. Specifically, Form 87B. Request permission to consider military action. This document was 43 pages long, required 17 signatures from 3 different subdepartments, and had to be submitted in triplicate using ink that cost more than most planets' annual GDP. And yet, the Kralaxians were proud of this system. They had conquered 12 star systems through sheer, stubborn, soul-crushing administrative diligence. They were the kind of species that would spend 30 years debating the optimal humidity for a storage closet and call it a strategic victory. So when the Council of 12 Tails turned their collective gaze toward a small, unremarkable blue planet orbiting a boring yellow star, they did not simply launch ships. They launched committees. The target was designated Sector Theta 9, planet designation, Mudball Prime. Humans called it Earth. The Kralaxians called it an upcoming paperwork opportunity. High Commandant Vexter, whose name in ancient Kralaxian translated roughly to "he who enjoys spreadsheets," slammed his primary tentacle on the conference table. We have conquered civilizations that could bend light. We have subjugated species that could read minds. Now we shall add these humans to our collection. The council applauded. With 14 tentacles each, the sound was like 1,000 wet socks being slapped against a marble floor. But here is where the first crack appeared. The hegemony's intelligence division, officially designated the Bureau of Extraterrestrial Observation and unofficially called the Couch Potatoes, had been monitoring Earth for 90 years. Unfortunately, due to a budgeting error involving the translation department's snack fund, they had been watching the wrong channels. Their most recent data was from 1957. Chief Intelligence Analyst Blork Spleen Thwalker presented his findings. The dominant species, referred to as humans, are bipedal mammals with primitive social structures. Their entertainment consists of something called sock hops. Their most advanced weapon appears to be a large black box that displays moving pictures in grayscale. General Thrax Gumble, a veteran of 17 planetary sieges, leaned forward. And their space travel capabilities? Fictional, Blork replied confidently. They produce traumatic narratives about rocket ships, but these are clearly for entertainment purposes. They have no ability to leave their atmosphere. What the Kralaxians did not know was that in the 60 years, since their last intelligence update, humans had done a few things. Small things. Inconsequential things. Like splitting the atom, building global satellite networks, landing on their moon, inventing the internet, and most terrifyingly, creating reality television. But the Kralaxian war machine rolled forward, blissfully unaware. High Commandant Vexter selected his invasion commander, Admiral Glib Snargle. Glib was the perfect Kralaxian officer. He alphabetized his breakfast cereals. He color-coded his sock drawer. He once spent a weekend organizing his collection of organizing supplies. He approached the invasion of Earth with the same manic energy he brought to everything else, which is to say, he created spreadsheets to track his other spreadsheets. We will spend 100 years preparing for this conquest, Glib announced to his staff. We will leave nothing to chance. Colonel Nix Bumbleflick, his deputy, whispered, Sir, isn't that excessive for a species that thinks I Love Lucy is a documentary? Glib's stare could freeze plasma. Colonel, the Kralaxian hegemony did not conquer 12 star systems by underestimating our enemies. We did it by overestimating everyone. Always, we will train, we will study, we will be ready. And so began the longest, most thorough, and most catastrophically misguided military preparation in galactic history. The Academy of Terrestrial Engagement was established on the remote moon of Thorpe 7. 50,000 elite warriors would spend the next century learning everything there was to know about fighting humans based entirely on 1950s television, bad sci-fi movies, and one very confused intelligence analyst's interpretation of The Ed Sullivan Show. The curriculum was extensive. Course offerings included human psychology and the nuclear family, countering gang warfare as depicted in West Side Story, urban combat in black and white environments, and advanced techniques for disrupting sock hops. Professor Floon Thistlewick, who taught the course on human social structures, was particularly proud of his research. Students, he would begin each lecture. The humans organize themselves into primitive units called families. The male leaves each day to engage in work. The female remains at the dwelling to prepare casseroles. Their offspring attend schools where they learn to communicate using crude symbols. The warriors took copious notes. They memorized diagrams of human cities based on the set of Leave It to Beaver. They studied human police procedures by analyzing episodes of Dragnet. They believed that all human conflicts ended with witty dialogue, and that every human dwelling contained a perfect, clean-shaven father who dispensed wisdom while wearing a cardigan. The tactical training was equally thorough and equally wrong. Flight instructors taught pilots to outmaneuver primitive propeller aircraft. Weapons. Trainers demonstrated techniques for dodging slow metal projectiles fired from crude guns. The medical corps prepared supplies for treating small pellet wounds and stockpiled antidotes for stink bombs, which their intelligence indicated was a primary human chemical weapon. "The key to victory," shouted Master Sergeant Glorp Wifflebat during a typical training session, "is understanding that humans are predictable. They will always announce their intentions. They will always stop fighting to exchange clever remarks. And they have an inexplicable tendency to split up when facing danger." The warriors nodded. They had seen this behavior in the intercepted broadcasts. It was consistent. It was reliable. It was, they believed, a fatal flaw they would exploit. After 50 years of training, Admiral Glib Snargle visited the academy to inspect his troops. He watched as squads of warriors practiced human negotiation techniques by saying things like, "Take me to your leader, Daddy-O," and "Resistance is futile, you crazy kids." "Magnificent," Glib whispered, a single tear rolling down his primary eye stalk. "We are unstoppable." He was, of course, completely wrong. But he wouldn't find that out for another 50 years. The Krilaxian invasion fleet, designated Task Force Inevitable Dawn, was the largest military assembly in the hegemony's history. 412 ships, 12,000 combat-ready warriors, enough firepower to crack a continent, and most importantly, enough coffee to keep the entire fleet caffeinated for a decade. The flagship, bringer of orderly annexation, was a marvel of military engineering. It carried a crew of 15,000, enough supplies for a century-long occupation, and weapon systems capable of converting a planet's surface to glass. Its universal translators had been programmed with extensive databases of 1950s English, including slang, idioms, and the complete script of every episode of The Honeymooners. Admiral Glib Snargle stood on the observation deck as the fleet prepared to depart. "Today," he announced to the assembled crew, "we begin the greatest military operation in our species' history. 100 years of training. 50,000 elite warriors. A plan so thorough, so meticulous, so spreadsheet approved, that failure is literally impossible." The crew cheered. Then they returned to their stations to file the necessary departure forms. The journey to Earth took several weeks, during which the warriors engaged in final preparations. They practiced their English. They reviewed their battle plans. And in the time-honored tradition of military personnel everywhere, they complained about the food. "I don't understand why we can't have real grok stew," complained Private Thrip Bimblepop. "This nutrient paste tastes like recycled engine lubricant." "Stop whining," replied Sergeant Clunk Wobblehat. "Soon we'll be eating human food. According to our intelligence, they consume something called hamburgers and hot dogs." They also have a beverage called Coca-Cola that they claim is the real thing. I am very curious about what the real thing means. The crew spent their free time studying human culture through the intercepted broadcasts. They watched the same episodes of I Love Lucy so many times that they could recite the dialogue. They debated the tactical significance of the Ed Sullivan Show. They developed elaborate theories about human mating rituals based entirely on sock hop choreography. I've always wanted to try human baseball, mused Corporal Vex Thistledown during an off-duty conversation. According to the broadcasts, it involves hitting a small sphere with a wooden stick. It sounds delightfully primitive. I'm more interested in their television, replied Private Blocks Wobblethorpe. The humans appear to spend considerable time sitting in groups and watching moving pictures. I wonder if they will allow us to participate in this ritual after we conquer them. As the fleet approached the Sol system, anticipation reached a fever pitch. This was the moment they had trained for, planned for, and dreamed about for 100 years. Earth was finally within reach, and soon the Krillaxian hegemony would add another world to its growing collection of conquered planets. Then things started to go wrong. The first sign came when the fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's moon. Navigation Officer Blip Witherspoon screamed, his primary eye stalk twitching uncontrollably. "Sir, multiple artificial objects in orbit. I'm detecting hundreds of them." Admiral Glib stared at his screens. "Impossible. Our intelligence clearly states that humans lack space travel capabilities. Sir, these objects are not natural. They appear to be satellites, communication devices, navigation systems. There's even something that looks like a space station." This was the first crack in their perfect plan. According to everything the Krillaxians knew about humans, space travel was purely fictional. Yet here they were, staring at evidence that humans had not only reached orbit, but had established a significant presence there. "Perhaps they are natural phenomena," suggested Communications Officer Vex Bimblethorpe, whose optimism often exceeded her common sense. "Very small, very organized, metallic natural phenomena, but their problems were just beginning." As the fleet moved closer to Earth, they encountered more and more evidence that their intelligence might have been somewhat outdated. The small metallic objects weren't just floating randomly. They were clearly artificial constructs, following precise orbital patterns. And they were everywhere. "Sir," announced Sensor Technician Malik Grande, squinting at her displays with all 6 of her eyes. "One of those objects is moving directly toward us. Fast." The object in question was a routine communications satellite launched by a private human company the previous week. It was following a perfectly normal trajectory that happened to intersect with the Krillaxian fleet's approach vector. To the aliens, however, it looked like a deliberate attack. "Evasive maneuvers," shouted Glib, his carefully rehearsed invasion speech suddenly forgotten. But it was too late. The satellite, which weighed approximately 800 kilograms and was traveling at several thousand kilometers per hour, collided with their starboard sensor array in what could only be described as the most expensive traffic accident in galactic history. The explosion wasn't particularly large by military standards, but it had several unfortunate consequences. First, it knocked out their primary communication system. Second, it damaged their main sensor array. And third, most devastatingly, it completely destroyed the coffee machine in the Admiral's private mess. "Damage report," barked Admiral Glib, trying to maintain his composure while privately wondering if the universe was playing a practical joke on him. "Sir, we've lost primary communications. Sensor array is operating at 60% efficiency." And the damage control officer paused, his voice breaking with emotion. "The coffee machine is beyond repair." A moment of silence fell over the bridge. Krillaxian military culture revolved around caffeine consumption to an almost religious degree. The loss of their coffee machine was more than a mechanical failure. It was a spiritual catastrophe. "Can it be fixed?" Glib asked hopefully. "I'm afraid not, sir. The entire brewing mechanism has been vaporized. We are down to emergency caffeine tablets. The morale impact was immediate. Kralaxian warriors, who had been confident and eager for battle just moments before, were now faced with the prospect of conducting a planetary invasion while suffering from caffeine withdrawal. And the situation was about to get much worse. Emergency Landing Protocol Delta 7. Admiral Glib's voice crackled across the fleet's damaged communication network. We will establish our beachhead on the surface and regroup. Delta 7 had been designed for situations where orbital superiority could not be maintained. It involved rapid atmospheric entry, immediate establishment of defensive positions, and aggressive expansion from the landing zone. It was a desperate plan, but the Kralaxian fleet had lost its taste for elegant orbital insertions after colliding with 3 more satellites, a piece of old space junk, and what appeared to be a very confused weather balloon. The fleet's descent through Earth's atmosphere was a study in cascading disasters. Ships that had been designed for stealthy entry found themselves plummeting through clouds while trying to avoid commercial aircraft, flocks of birds, and one particularly aggressive crop duster. "Commander!" screamed the pilot of the flagship as they dropped through the cloud layer. "I'm detecting multiple fast-moving objects in the atmosphere." "Human fighter aircraft," Glib replied grimly. "Prepare for air-to-air combat." What they had actually detected were 4 commercial airliners, a cargo plane, a news helicopter, and a formation of migrating geese. But without their primary sensor array and operating on outdated intelligence about human aviation capabilities, the Kralaxian crews had no way of knowing this. The flagship executed a barrel roll to avoid what its pilot thought was an incoming missile. It was actually Delta Flight 447 from Phoenix to Denver. The cruiser, Herald of Impending Doom, performed an emergency dive to evade what appeared to be enemy fighters. They turned out to be a V-shaped formation of Canadian geese, who honked indignantly as the ship screamed past. "The humans are more agile than we expected," reported Squadron Leader Thrip Bimblern as he watched a commercial jet disappear into a cloud bank. "Their aircraft are fast and maneuverable. We have never faced such aerial opponents." By the time the first wave of landing craft reached the surface, the invasion force had already suffered more casualties than in any previous Kralaxian military operation, and they hadn't even encountered any actual human resistance yet. The landing site selection was handled by the fleet's tactical computers, which had been programmed to identify optimal strategic locations based on their understanding of human civilization. The computers analyzed the terrain below, looking for sites that matched their criteria for military importance. Large flat areas near population centers, good visibility, defensible positions. What the computers found was the Milledgeville Municipal Golf Course, just outside Tucson, Arizona. By Kralaxian standards, it was perfect. A large open area with maintained vegetation, close to human settlements. Clear sight lines in all directions. What appeared to be defensive water features strategically positioned throughout the facility. The computers had no way of knowing that what they were looking at was a recreational facility where humans came to hit small balls with sticks for entertainment. "Strategic location identified," announced the tactical computer in its perfectly calm artificial voice. "Large flat area with maintained perimeter. Multiple water obstacles for defensive purposes. Adjacent to human population center. Probability of military significance, 93%. And so it was that 50,000 of the galaxy's most thoroughly trained warriors, supported by the most advanced invasion fleet in known space, prepared to establish their beachhead on the 14th hole of a municipal golf course in Arizona. The first landing craft touched down at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was shining. The temperature was a pleasant 76 degrees Fahrenheit, and groundskeeper Harold Wixworth was having what he thought was going to be a perfectly ordinary day ride up until several hundred tons of alien spacecraft crashed into his freshly manicured pudding green. Harold had been working at Milledgeville Municipal for 39 years. He had started as a teenager, looking for summer work, and had gradually worked his way up to head groundskeeper. In his decades of service, he had dealt with every kind of challenge a golf course could present: drought, floods, insects, vandalism, occasional drunk golfer who thought it would be funny to drive a cart into a water hazard. But in all his years of experience, Harold had never had to deal with an alien invasion. This was, technically speaking, outside his job description. Harold was trimming grass around the fourth hole when the first chip came down. He heard the roar of atmospheric entry engines, looked up, and watched as a metallic craft roughly the size of a city bus descended from the sky, trailing smoke and making sounds that no properly functioning aircraft should ever make. "Oh, for crying out loud," he shouted as the spacecraft plowed into his perfectly maintained putting green, creating a crater roughly 20 feet across and destroying 6 months of careful lawn care work. "That's the third time this month someone's messed up my greens." This was, technically speaking, an exaggeration. The previous incidents had involved a runaway food truck that had taken a wrong turn and a flock of particularly destructive geese. But Harold was upset, and when Harold was upset, precision took a backseat to righteous indignation. More ships were coming down now, landing in various locations around the golf course with varying degrees of success. The second wave managed to avoid the greens, but took out most of the sand traps on the back nine. The third wave landed in the parking lot and demolished a significant portion of the clubhouse's outdoor patio furniture. One particularly unfortunate ship crashed into the beverage cart shed. Harold watched this destruction with the sort of calm resignation that comes from spending 4 decades in groundskeeping. Every golf course maintenance professional develops a philosophical acceptance of the fact that golfers, weather, and wildlife will constantly try to undo their work. Adding aliens to that list was just another challenge to overcome. The landing craft that had destroyed his putting green was now sitting silent and smoking in the crater it had created. As Harold watched, a door opened in the side of the spacecraft with what the designers had intended to be an intimidating pneumatic hiss. Unfortunately, damage sustained during landing had reduced the effect to something that sounded more like a deflating balloon at a children's birthday party. Admiral Glib Snargle emerged from the spacecraft in full ceremonial battle armor. His tentacles moved with practiced military precision as he surveyed the landing site. His plasma rifle was charged and ready. His universal translator was programmed with extensive databases of human language and culture. He was, by every measure that mattered to the Kralaxian military, prepared for anything Earth could throw at him. What he wasn't prepared for was Harold Wixworth, standing 10 feet away, wearing grass-stained overalls and holding a pair of hedge clippers, looking at him with the expression of a man who had just discovered that someone had parked their car in his flower bed. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Admiral Glib Snargle was experiencing something that Kralaxian military psychologists would later classify as acute cognitive dissonance with paranoid overtones. According to everything he had learned about humans, they should have been terrified by his appearance. They should have been running away, screaming or falling to their knees in awe, or at the very least looking impressed by his advanced technology. Instead, this human was looking at him like he was a particularly annoying problem that needed to be solved before lunch. Harold, for his part, was taking in the alien's appearance with the calm, analytical mind of someone who had spent decades solving practical problems. Tentacles, he thought. Weird, but no weirder than some of the golfers he'd encountered over the years. Fancy armor, probably compensating for something. Glowing weapon, definitely compensating. Surrender, primitive life form, Glib finally declared in what he believed to be perfect English, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had practiced this speech in front of a mirror for the better part of a century. "I am Admiral Glib Snargle of the Kralaxian hegemony. This world is now under our dominion. Resistance is futile." Harold squinted at the alien for a moment, processing this information with the same methodical approach he used when deciding which fertilizer to use on the rough. He took in the dramatic pose, the glowing weapon, and the general air of menace that Glib was projecting. "Well, ain't that something?" Harold replied with considerable feeling, his voice carrying 39 years of dealing with people who didn't respect his golf course. "You just destroyed my pudding green. Do you have any idea how long it takes to grow grass in this desert? 6 months. 6 months of watering, fertilizing, and keeping the geese away. And you smashed it like it was nothing." Glib's Universal Translator, which had been programmed with extensive databases of 1950s American English, was having some difficulty processing Harold's response. The computer helpfully suggested that "ain't that something" was some sort of primitive war cry. The reference to 6 months was clearly a threat about a prolonged military campaign. And geese was obviously the Krolaxian word for elite human soldiers. I do not understand your aggressive stance, human warrior," Glib stammered, suddenly realizing that his carefully rehearsed invasion speech wasn't having the desired effect. "You should be cowering in fear at our technological superiority." Harold looked at the smoking spacecraft, which was now making ominous grinding noises and leaking something that looked suspiciously like alien motor oil onto his immaculate fairway. He had seen more impressive technology in the clubhouse bathroom. Technological superiority? Harold laughed, a sound that contained 39 years of dealing with broken sprinkler systems, temperamental golf carts, and members who thought they knew better than the maintenance staff. "Buddy, I've seen more impressive technology in a kid's toy store. Your fancy spaceship looks like it was put together with duct tape, wishful thinking, and a prayer to whatever gods handle warranty claims." This response caused something fundamental to break inside Glib's worldview. According to everything he knew about humans, they should have been terrified or awestruck. Instead, this apparent human warrior was critiquing his spacecraft's engineering with the casual authority of someone who knew what they were talking about. But we are the Krolaxian hegemony," Glib protested weakly, his voice rising to a pitch that would have been embarrassing if anyone from his home planet had been listening. "We have conquered 12 star systems. Our military might is legendary across the galaxy." Harold adjusted his work gloves and gave the alien the same look he reserved for golf carts that wouldn't start on busy Saturday mornings. 12 star systems, huh? That's nice. I've been maintaining 18 holes for 39 years, and I've never had one of them crash land in my parking lot. Maybe you should work on your landing technique before you go around conquering things." It was at this precise moment that Glib began to suspect that their century of intelligence gathering might have been somewhat incomplete. The situation was deteriorating rapidly across the entire golf course. More landing craft were touching down every few minutes, disgorging confused Krolaxian warriors who had trained extensively to fight 1950s humans, but were now faced with the reality of 21st century recreational facility management. Squad leader Knox. Thistledown had established what he thought was a defensive perimeter around the water hazard on the 7th hole. But his carefully planned military position was being systematically disrupted by the arrival of maintenance worker Betty Lou Perkins, who was driving her beverage cart directly toward his position with the unstoppable determination of someone who had 25 years of customer service experience. "Excuse me, sweeties," Betty Lou called out cheerfully as she parked her cart next to a group of heavily armed alien warriors. "You boys need to move along. We've got a senior citizens tournament starting in 20 minutes, and these folks don't like to be kept waiting." Knox stared at the small pink vehicle that had just appeared in his defensive zone. According to his training, this was clearly some sort of armored personnel carrier designed to blend in with civilian infrastructure. The fact that it was bright pink with decorative flowers painted on the sides only confirmed his suspicions about human military deception tactics. "Hostile vehicle has penetrated our perimeter," he screamed into his communicator, his voice cracking with panic. "Requesting immediate backup. The humans are more cunning than we anticipated." Betty Lou, completely oblivious to the fact that she was being classified as a military threat, began unloading coolers of sports drinks and prepackaged sandwiches from her cart. She had been working the beverage cart at Milledgeville Municipal for 17 years, and in that time she had developed the kind of customer service skills that made her completely immune to surprise, confusion, or alien invasion. "Now, what can I get you folks?" she asked in the tone of someone who had dealt with every possible type of difficult customer and was therefore prepared for anything. "We've got cold drinks, hot coffee, and I just made a fresh batch of chicken salad sandwiches this morning." Knox looked at the human female who was apparently offering him sustenance instead of fleeing in terror. This was completely outside his training parameters. According to everything he had learned about human behavior, civilians were supposed to run away screaming when confronted with superior alien technology. What is chicken salad?" he asked weakly, his plasma rifle hanging forgotten at his side. "Oh, honey, you've never had chicken salad?" Betty Lou's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. She had raised 4 children and 7 grandchildren, and she recognized the look of someone who needed feeding when she saw it. "Well, aren't you just the sweetest thing? Here, try one of these." She handed him a sandwich wrapped in plastic, which Knox accepted reflexively. The moment he took a bite, 2 things happened simultaneously. His taste buds experienced something that could only be described as transcendent culinary revelation, and his entire understanding of human technological capabilities underwent a complete and total collapse. The sandwich was, without any exaggeration whatsoever, the most delicious thing he had ever tasted in his 8 decades of existence. The perfect balance of flavors, the ideal texture, the way the mayonnaise complemented the chicken, while the seasoning added just the right amount of complexity. It was a masterpiece of food science that put Krillaxian military rations to shame. "By the tentacles of the great void," he exclaimed after swallowing his first bite. "What sorcery is this?" "It's just chicken, mayo, and a little bit of celery, sweetie," Betty Lou replied modestly. "The secret is to use fresh herbs from my garden. Would you like another one?" Knox stared at her in growing horror. If humans could create something this magnificent from simple ingredients, what other technological marvels were they hiding? What devastating weapons could a species capable of such culinary perfection develop if they put their minds to it? "Command," he shouted into his communicator, his voice breaking with emotion and existential dread. "The humans have developed some sort of incredible food technology. I think we may have seriously underestimated their capabilities." Similar scenes were playing out across the golf course as more Krillaxian warriors encountered the reality of human hospitality. Squad 7 had been completely neutralized by the appearance of a group of senior citizens who had arrived early for their tournament and were now offering the confused aliens coffee and donuts while asking detailed questions about their home planet's climate and social customs. "So, you're from outer space?" asked Mrs. Henderson, an 82-year-old retired teacher who had never met a stranger she couldn't turn into a friend given enough time and baked goods. "How exciting. I've always wondered what other planets were like. Is it true that you don't have seasons?" Squad leader Grix Molat, a decorated veteran of 4 interplanetary campaigns, found himself sitting on a park bench explaining Krillaxian atmospheric conditions while eating what Mrs. Henderson called "my famous snickerdoodles." He had trained for decades to resist human torture techniques, but he was completely unprepared for an elderly grandmother asking about his family while feeding him homemade cookies. "Well, you see," he found himself saying, his military bearing completely forgotten, "Krillax Prime has a binary star system, so our seasonal patterns are quite complex." "How fascinating," Mrs. Henderson replied, refilling his coffee cup. "And do you have children? You look like you'd be wonderful with children." Within minutes, Grix was showing her pictures on his communicator and explaining that yes, Krillaxian children did lose their tentacles when they got older. And no, it didn't hurt. It was perfectly natural, just like human children losing their baby teeth. Back at the command ship, which was now listing at a 30-degree angle in what used to be the water hazard on the 12th hole. Admiral Glib was receiving increasingly frantic and confusing reports from his ground forces. "Sir, Squad 7 reports that the humans have deployed some sort of psychological warfare device. They're calling it hospitality. Squad 12 has encountered human defensive fortifications. They appear to be called golf carts, and they are everywhere. Admiral, Squad 3 has been completely neutralized by human chemical warfare agents. The weapons appear to be dispensed from mobile platforms and come in flavors including cherry, blue raspberry, and something called Diet Cola." Glebe felt a growing sense of dread as he studied the tactical displays. Their intelligence had clearly been catastrophically wrong about human capabilities. Not only did they possess advanced orbital defense systems that had decimated their fleet during approach, but their ground forces were employing sophisticated psychological warfare techniques that his own warriors seemed powerless against. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Glib," he ordered, forgetting for a moment that he was, in fact, Admiral Glib. The stress was getting to him. But Glib was currently experiencing his own crisis of command authority. Harold had spent the last 20 minutes explaining the basics of golf course maintenance, and the alien admiral was beginning to understand that he had landed his invasion force in the middle of what humans called a recreational facility, not a military installation, not a strategic government complex, not even a training ground for human warriors. A place where people came to hit small balls with sticks for entertainment. "You mean to tell me," Glib said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of dawning comprehension, "that this entire complex exists solely for entertainment purposes?" "Well, duh," Harold replied with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should have known better. "What did you think it was? A military base? A government facility? It's a golf course, for crying out loud. People pay money to come here and hit little white balls around." The silence that followed was the sound of a century of military planning collapsing under the weight of its own absurdity. But our intelligence indicated that humans were primitive." Glib's voice was becoming increasingly high-pitched as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "Limited technology, simple social structures. You're supposed to be cowering in fear of our superior weapons." Harold looked around at the chaos unfolding across his golf course. Krillaxian warriors were being systematically defeated by senior citizens offering them lemonade. Maintenance workers were providing technical advice about their broken spacecraft. Betty Lou's beverage cart was making its third pass, and the aliens were actually lining up for more sandwiches. "Primitive?" Harold laughed, a sound that contained 39 years of dealing with people who underestimated the complexity of modern life. "Buddy, we put 12 men on the moon. We built a space station that's been continuously occupied for over 2 decades. We invented a global communication network that lets my grandson show me videos of cats playing piano that 3 million people have watched. Last week, I ordered lunch from my phone and had it delivered by a robot. What have you accomplished lately, besides crashing into my pudding green?" And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the moment when the Krillaxian invasion officially ended. It wasn't a military defeat in any traditional sense. There were no heroic last stands, no desperate battles against overwhelming odds, no dramatic sacrifices for the good of humanity. Instead, it was the slow, creeping, absolutely devastating realization that they had spent 100 years preparing to fight an enemy that existed only in their outdated intelligence files. The real humans, as it turned out, were something far more terrifying than any warrior race the Krillaxians had ever encountered. They were a species that had somehow managed to combine advanced technology with casual friendliness, devastating military capability with an inexplicable desire to feed strangers, and the ability to casually mention putting people on the moon while complaining about damaged lawn care. Major Vex Thistledatum, a veteran of 20 planetary invasions who had earned commendations for bravery under fire, discovered that his plasma rifle was completely useless against what the humans called the beverage cart of doom. The small pink vehicle had somehow surrounded his entire squad and was dispensing cold drinks faster than his warriors could refuse them. "Would you prefer diet cola or regular?" asked the cart's operator, a cheerful human female who seemed completely unaware that she was addressing heavily armed alien invaders. Vex tried to maintain military discipline, but when faced with a direct question about beverage preferences, something fundamental broke inside his combat conditioning. He had been trained to resist interrogation, to withstand torture, to maintain operational security under the most extreme circumstances. But nobody had prepared him for customer service. "I'm not sure," he admitted weakly. "What's the difference?" "Well, Diet Cola has fewer calories, but some people say it doesn't taste as good," the human explained patiently. "Regular has more sugar, but it's the classic flavor. First time trying Earth beverages?" And just like that, Major Vex Thistlebatom found himself engaged in a detailed discussion about human beverage technology while his squad stood around drinking soda and eating snacks. Within 20 minutes, they had learned more about Earth culture than their intelligence division had discovered in a century of monitoring. The psychological impact was devastating. These weren't the primitive creatures they had trained to fight. These were members of a species that had casually achieved interplanetary travel, developed global communication networks, and created beverages with multiple flavor options as a matter of routine convenience. The final nail in the coffin of the Krolaxian invasion came when Admiral Glib received a communication from Earth's government. Not a military response demanding surrender, not a declaration of war, not even a strongly worded diplomatic protest. Instead, it was a politely worded message from something called the Department of Agriculture, asking if they needed assistance with landing permits and whether any of their species had dietary restrictions they should be aware of for catering purposes. The message, which had been composed by a junior staffer named Jennifer, who had seen the news reports about unusual aircraft incidents at the golf course, concluded with an invitation to a welcome reception at the local community center, complete with a potluck dinner and live music by the Tucson Senior Citizens Swing Band. "Dear visitors," the message read, "welcome to Earth. We understand you may have experienced some technical difficulties during your arrival. The Tucson Department of Emergency Management is standing by to provide assistance with any medical needs, transportation issues, or accommodation requirements. We've also arranged for a cultural exchange dinner this Friday at 7 p.m. at the Milledgeville Community Center. Please let us know about any dietary restrictions. Looking forward to meeting you. Jennifer Morrison, Deputy Assistant Coordinator for Unusual Events." Glib stared at the message for several minutes, reading it over and over again as if repetition might somehow make it make sense. Then he walked over to the nearest airlock and screamed into the void of space for approximately 30 seconds, which was the maximum amount of time he could hold his breath in the vacuum. When he was finished, he opened a communication channel to all ships in the fleet. "All units," he announced with the weary resignation of someone whose entire career had just become a cautionary tale that would be studied in military academies for generations. "Prepare for immediate withdrawal. Operation Terrestrial Dominion is postponed indefinitely." The retreat, if it could be dignified with such a military term, was even more chaotic than the invasion. Several landing craft wouldn't start due to sand in their engines courtesy of Harold's overly enthusiastic sprinkler system. 3 ships had to be towed out of water hazards by human tow trucks whose operators refused payment, but did ask for autographs and selfies with the alien crews. "This is so cool," exclaimed Jake Morrison, a local mechanic who had been called in to help with the unusual vehicle recovery situation. "Can I get a picture with you for my Instagram? My followers are never going to believe this." Squad leader Blix Thornwood found his transport completely disabled when Mrs. Henderson's grandson, a well-meaning automotive technician, helpfully tried to fix their hyperdrive with a set of jumper cables and succeeded in overloading their entire electrical system. "I've never seen an engine like this before," Bobby Henderson announced cheerfully as sparks flew from the alien spacecraft's propulsion system. "But don't worry, I've got this. My uncle taught me everything there is to know about fixing cars." The repair took 4 hours, during which the squad was fed a steady stream of sandwiches and lemonade, while Mrs. Henderson interrogated them about Kralaxian family structures, social customs, and whether they had anything like Medicare on their home planet. "So, you don't have universal health care?" she asked, genuinely concerned. "Well, that's just terrible. How do you take care of your elderly?" By sunset, the last of the Kralaxian ships was limping away from Earth's atmosphere. Their holds were full of goodbye gifts from the people of Tucson. These included 23 casserole dishes, 51 jars of homemade preserves, a cooler full of Betty Lou's famous chicken salad sandwiches, and one very confused golf cart that she had insisted they take for the road. "You boys take care of yourselves," Betty Lou called out as the last transport lifted off from the parking lot. "And don't be strangers. You're welcome back anytime." The official Kralaxian after-action report, which was immediately classified at the highest levels and buried in filing, systems so deep that archaeological expeditions would have trouble finding them, contained the following summary. Earth invasion attempt resulted in total mission failure due to catastrophic intelligence errors spanning approximately 70 years. Human species demonstrates advanced technological capabilities far exceeding initial assessments, combined with inexplicable behavioral patterns that render traditional military doctrine completely ineffective. Recommendation: add Earth to the Galactic Do Not Disturb list immediately and institute mandatory memory modification for all personnel involved to prevent psychological trauma. Also recommend immediate study of human chicken salad technology by our best scientists. But the report also noted, in a small footnote that would become the stuff of legend among military historians throughout the galaxy, that human hospitality appeared to be a form of weaponized kindness so devastating that it could neutralize trained warriors without causing any physical harm whatsoever. Admiral Glib Snargle was quietly transferred to a desk job in the Outer Rim territories, where he spent his remaining years developing new first contact protocols based on his Earth experience. His manual, Invasion Planning in the Age of Unexpected Hospitality, became required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy and spawned an entire new field of military science called Defensive Niceness Studies. Fleet Admiral Cork Nifat, Glib's second-in-command, retired early and opened a small restaurant specializing in Earth-style sandwiches, which became surprisingly popular among the diplomatic corps. He never spoke publicly about the invasion, but rumor had it that he kept a picture of Betty Lou's beverage cart on his office wall as a reminder that the universe was full of surprises. Harold Wixworth received a commendation from the mayor of Tucson for outstanding service in the face of extraterrestrial landscaping challenges and used the insurance money from the spacecraft damage to install a new irrigation system. He never spoke publicly about the invasion, partly because nobody would have believed him, but mostly because he had made the aliens promise to call ahead next time they wanted to visit. Common courtesy, he had explained to Glib during their final conversation. That's all I'm asking for. A phone call. Maybe an email. "Hey, Harold, we're planning to invade on Tuesday. Is that okay? I'm a reasonable man." We could have worked something out. The golf course reopened 2 weeks later with a new water feature on the 14th hole, a small crater that Harold had converted into a decorative pond complete with a bronze plaque reading, "Alien Landing Site. Please replace divots." The feature became quite popular with golfers, who enjoyed the novelty of putting around what they believed was an artistic interpretation of a meteor impact. Earth, meanwhile, continued its orbit around the Sun, blissfully unaware that it had just become the most feared planet in 3 star systems. The news reports described the incident as a minor aviation mishap involving experimental aircraft, and most people forgot about it entirely within a week. The few who remembered assumed it was some sort of publicity stunt or viral marketing campaign. But in command centers across the galaxy, military planners were hastily revising their threat assessments of the small blue-green world in the Sol system, the planet that had destroyed a century-trained invasion force in 12 minutes without firing. A shot had earned a reputation that would make even the most aggressive species think twice before paying them a visit. The Kralaxian hegemony quietly removed Earth from their expansion charts and established a 5-light-year exclusion zone around the entire solar system. The official reason, according to their diplomatic corps, was ongoing geological surveys of unusual mineral deposits. The real reason was that nobody wanted to explain to their superiors how they had lost an entire invasion fleet to a species that defeated them with snack foods, small talk, and aggressive hospitality. The Theorian hive mind, upon hearing about the Kralaxian debacle through the Galactic Intelligence Network, immediately canceled their own planned invasion of Earth and redirected their forces toward a nice, safe, uninhabited star system where the worst thing they might encounter would be asteroid mining equipment. The Vorton Collective went so far as to issue a formal declaration that Earth was a protected cultural heritage site and should be preserved for future study by xenoanthropologists, preferably from a distance of several light years. And Harold Wixworth, groundskeeper extraordinaire, went back to maintaining his golf course, secure in the knowledge that he had the greenest, most well-defended putting surfaces in the known universe. Protected by humanity's most devastating weapon, the unshakable conviction that problems could be solved with hard work, common sense, and a really good sandwich. The Kralaxian hegemony never returned. But every year, on the anniversary of the invasion, a small package would arrive at the Milledgeville Municipal Golf Course, addressed to Harold. Inside was a letter written in broken English, a collection of exotic spices from across the galaxy, and a simple message: "Thank you for the sandwiches. We are still studying them. Please do not invade us in retaliation." Harold would read the letter, shake his head, and go back to mowing the fairways. Some lessons, he knew, took a while to learn. But eventually, even aliens figured out that the best way to deal with humans was to bring a good casserole and a willingness to listen. And somewhere, in a small restaurant on the edge of known space, a retired Kralaxian admiral served an Earth-style chicken salad sandwich to a nervous diplomatic corps member and smiled. "Don't worry," he would say. "They're friendly. Just don't land on their golf course."